Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Alex's Afternoon Art Show. Today we are drawing Rogue, who is rapidly, I think, becoming my most drawn character at this point. I think Rogue might be up there with Wolverine, because technically speaking Wolverine's really high, because I've drawn Wolverine, I did two different Wolverines for the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 mural. And then there was the one at the start of the show, then there was the one more recently, then there's Weapon X, there's 5 different Wolverines, and I think this is maybe the 4th or 3rd Rogue. No, yeah, I think this is maybe the 3rd. Thinking, I don't know. 3rd or 4th, I don't know. I don't remember how many I've done of these. Spider-Man's up there. There's a few characters who are up there. But a lot of them I actually haven't drawn all that much. A lot of the sort of popular ones I haven't drawn all that much. I don't tend to repeat characters super often. That's because there's a lot of characters on my list, and I just felt like throwing in Rogue. So we're going to be talking a little bit about flying poses. That's more really the reason why I wanted to do this one, because I was like, I want to do some flying poses, and I also want to do a little bit of design work or something like that. Something just to change things up a little bit, because usually whenever I draw Rogue, I do the 90s design, and or I'll change something a bit. Like I did the X-Men Evolution one that one time. The Marvel vs. Capcom 2 one was Marvel vs. Capcom 2 one was a sort of more of a focus on the 90s design as well, and there was the 90s. This one is sort of the 90s design, but with a little different. There's some changes. Anyways, I'll roll the intro because I've rambled for quite a bit before we've even gotten to the actual drawing. So yeah, I'll roll the intro and I'll show you what I have, and then we'll talk a little bit more. Yeah. Okay, so this is what we have. So this took quite a lot of different bits of reference. This one was a very hard pose to cobble together, I will say that. I don't really remember it because I did this a while ago now. Yeah, so each individual part of this, I think the total number of individual reference images that I had to use for this was like 9 or something like that. So this took a while. I think the torso, the legs, the arms, and the head, they were all different. I don't think they were all from, they were all from different reference sources. But yeah, I used a lot of different reference images for this one. That's the sort of thing with flying poses. With any sort of pose, I've talked about this before, whenever you're trying to make a pose look more interesting, generally speaking, you have to avoid getting bored. The thing that I tend to find helps with that is have the limbs be doing different things. The flying pose in particular, you can get away with that very easily. Symmetry in posing can get boring, but whenever you're using a lot of flying poses, you have a lot of liberty to not use symmetry for these things. For example, you can have, when it comes to the legs, you have the one leg raised, one leg straight. With the arms, a lot of the time people will have the 2 arms back straight, or they'll have them both forward. Here they're both forward, well, sort of forward. There's the one forward straight like that, and then the wrist is bending out like this. Like almost like a revving motion, and then there's the other arm here, which is dipping back, and the wrist is downward. So yeah, I mean, there's not. I mean, some of the stuff here, there's not actually much movement going on here, I would say, because the jacket is like sort of flapping back a little bit. You can see it's loose there. I wanted to give her a bit of a baggier jacket this time because I thought that would look a little bit more interesting. Because I usually have it be more sort of form-fitting in that sense. It's not like super baggy or loose or anything like that, so I wanted to go for something a little looser. And then with the bandana, that's sort of flying out at the side like this, so that would usually tie at the back, so you could say it's flying out and then dipping forward, so there's like a bit of a draft. At least with that, I gave the jacket a belt. And I've generally done a lot of this stuff to try and minimize the amount of itty-bitty details that I have to worry so much about. But a lot of this, there is still the details. I've added some. I've added bits of black that will work through the costume, because in a lot of this stuff, in a lot of Rogue's designs, especially the 90s design, the green of the costume generally is a sort of it can be a bit of a shiny material. So what I've done to avoid having, because a lot of artists, in order to show that something is a shiny material, what they would do would be that they would use very heavy dark spots, and then vice versa, bright light spots. So I'm not necessarily going to do that, so what I am doing instead is I'm just working black into that. Because it's already black in the design, there's already bits of like the little black stripes here and the top of the collar and stuff like that, and the X. I've decided to just incorporate little bits of black like underneath at the back of the thigh, back of the heel, inside of the arms, stuff like that, just so there's a little bit more end of the back, stuff like that, where these were areas where I would ordinarily put like a few little movement lines. Like I've even put them here, like the end of these little stripes, they work down and they form a little trim along the edge of the yellow part on the bodysuit. And then there's a little, well, these are actually not, oh yeah, there's a little line there moving from the back of the heel. Because yeah, I decided to put a little black spot on the back of the heel just so that it sort of emphasizes the shape of the foot. I think that looks a bit more interesting. And yeah, like there were a few details of the face which I found somewhat difficult whenever I was doing this. For example, the sort of, whenever you're trying to apply a bit of an angle to a smile, you have to be very careful, because realistically speaking, the bottom lip should protrude a little bit. Like whenever the face is up like this, you will be seeing the bottom lip does protrude in that way. And if it's someone who has a bit of a thicker bottom lip, that will then obviously, it'll dip out a little bit from the shape of the face, and obviously whenever you're smiling, your cheeks come up, and so the cheekbones or the cheeks will seem rounder and wider, and stuff like that. The chin comes down, obviously, all these little things like that. So I've given her the big hair, but I've sort of reduced the amount of white area in the hair. So yeah, there's more sort of these defined sort of flaring shapes along here. It's not the whole top of her hair is white. It's more localized to the front. I brought it more towards the front. Because yeah, a lot of the time there's like bits of brown that move up through the front, and then there's just like little bits of white that sort of fall down in front of the face. But I've kept it so that most of the front is white, and then it's more the back and the sides that are normal brown. So yeah, I've talked about this before, but posing is not just the sort of the actual way the limbs are positioned. A lot of that stuff can be, you know, showcased in hair, in clothing, in face, and all this stuff. I mean, these are things which I have been touching on as we've been going. But yeah, when it comes to a flying pose, angle is very important. In order to, you know, convey that there's movement happening here, even though I've just said that there's actually not very much movement happening in this. Like the hair isn't really moving back, it's not flying back. There's a little bit of like an up curl at the back here, you can see, of where it's like sort of being blown back a little bit. But a lot of this stuff is sort of falling forward or out to the side. Now that you could say is because she's sort of moving forward like that. You could say that there's a twist as she's sort of flying. Which, I mean, that does stand to reason, because the coat is sort of, or the jacket is sort of flaring out like this. You could say that's because she's raising her arm. This one's sort of coming forward. You could say it's because she's pulling her arm back like this, because whenever you would sort of quickly pull your arm back, if like you were wearing a jacket or something like that, there would be that moment of hang time where you can see it in the sleeve of where as you're sort of any sort of fabric, as you're sort of moving back, there's that moment of it stays in its position. It's the same with like when you move your hair. Like there's that moment of where things sort of stay in their position and then they snap forward and then they swing. That's the sort of, that's the nature. I mean, that's a very animated way of talking about it. But there's obviously the sort of stages to things. You could say we're in a sort of an early stage of the movement of where here hand is going up, this is coming out, hand is going back, this is sort of staying forward a little bit, and then the idea being that it would then swing back. But yeah, the belt is sort of falling down low and stuff like that, but it's not being sort of, it's not loop, it's not like flying back or anything, because this is a loose belt. Usually Rogue has a loose belt, but like usually that would mean it would sort of be falling back a little bit, but it's not. So this is the thing. You could say, oh, we're sort of in a bit of an early stage of the movement. But again, angle, very important to selling a flying pose to sort of convey the movement. So she's leaning forward. Well, there's a sort of a bend to the body here of where there's a sort of this kind of angling to things. I don't know. My brain is really failing me right now, and we're only at the start, so this is only going to get worse as we go along. But yeah, the things are sort of bending up. Her back is arched that way, so it's sort of selling this sort of, again, like a upward movement of the sort of arching of the back. The upper body is leaning forward, then everything backwards is sort of dipping back out. This leg is poking that way, so again, this is sort of showing a bit more of a movement upwards like this. That's sort of, again, little bits of posing like that, little things. And that's the sort of stuff that builds out the pose. In the end is, again, little details. Little details are very important in that respect. And even, again, something as simple as the little lines that I have working through the jacket, they do a little bit of sort of adding a little bit of motion to things. And not even the sort of folds, the actual like lines in the jacket. Like here I've got this thicker line that sort of moves through here and then comes down into, that would sort of then merge down into the lapel, I think is the term that I would use for it. And that's the same thing here. I've got one that comes out along the back that sort of forms this pointed shape, pointed sharp lines, again, that sort of sells intensity in movement and stuff like that. So it's just little things like this. These aren't necessarily things that you notice all that much, but they do subconsciously affect how you see things. It's not the biggest thing in the world, it's not hugely important, but they're just little things that are important to sort of conveying a little bit more. But yeah, I think that's sort of everything we needed to cover for the basic stuff. First, we're going to be talking a little bit about color later, because I think we're going to be having, I did name the file yellow, so we're going to be doing a little bit of color stuff later, so I'll have a bit more to talk about there. I haven't talked about the design with color stuff already, the little adjustments to the design that way, so I'll have some stuff to talk about with that later. So yeah, I'll do these details, and then I'll be back to talk about the colors. So yeah. Alright, it's now the following day. I wound up stopping the recording because this ended up taking about 3 hours just to do the details alone. So yeah, it ended up taking a little bit. So, something which I didn't mention a few episodes ago, whenever obviously the fact that these are now bi-weekly, is the fact that a big part of the reason for why I made these bi-weekly is that I don't have as much time, and I would like to dedicate more time to doing them properly and making our quality. So I believe that is what I'm trying to do here. So this is now 2 recordings where it would have otherwise been 1, as has been the case for a lot of these more recent ones, turning into multiple recordings more often than they did before, and so now we're in the situation where we're getting a lot of these episodes as multiple recordings. Again, I do think it's resulting in better final products, but it would be nice if they were quick. But yeah, so details wise, I didn't really touch on this before, but a thing which I tend to do with Rogue is proportionally I give her some sort of different proportions to what I would do for a lot of other characters. Hair wise is obviously a big one, because again, proportions is something worth noting. I'll turn on the base case just so this is obvious. So generally speaking, Rogue has very big hair. That's just a natural, a sort of a part of her character. She has very big hair. So this is not as big as I would have made it, as I would usually make it, because you can see the sort of, it raises off of the head quite a bit there, and we've also got a bit of perspective going on here, a bit of an angle here, so that's sort of, again, this is quite big for hair, but it's not quite as big as I have made it in the past. Other drawings have made it very, very big. But here I've decided to make it sort of a more medium size. Therefore, it's still big, but a thing, a sort of a body type proportional thing that I usually do with Rogue as well is that I make her a bit more sort of stocky. I generally don't make her sort of tall seeming. I normally make her seem a little smaller and a little bit sort of stockier. So she's got sort of bigger shoulders, bigger legs, and generally a sort of just a thicker body type. That's usually what I go for, and so I think that's the case here. She's a little longer in body than I would ordinarily go for, I'd say, than I would ordinarily do. But yeah, I mean, it makes no real difference at the end of the day. It's just a slight design tweak that I make for the character. It's not quite as important as something like Wolverine being short, where he's got to be very short, very burly. That's not necessarily the case here. It's not quite so important. It's just a thing that I think is interesting to do, a thing that I like doing. Again, I like to sort of vary up the body types of the characters because it's more interesting to draw. Because drawing the same sort of body type is very repetitive, and again, as I mentioned, it's the same sort of thing with symmetry and asymmetry. Asymmetry is more fun to draw because you're going to be doing more different stuff for longer. It's the same thing with changing up your proportions on a character. It's more fun to proportionally deviate, because if you don't, then you're going to get a bit more bored of drawing the same sort of fairly frequently. I try to change up the body types of characters somewhat frequently. I try not to get too bogged down in the same kinds of body types all the time, even though I would say that Rogue here is very similar to the sort of body types that I tend to draw for women, sort of longer and slimmer. Even though here I'd say she's a little bit thicker than the average female character that I tend to draw. Yeah, it's just the sort of thing where it's again just for your own sort of enjoyment of the craft. That's the thing. Vary things up. Find ways to keep yourself interested. You got to do at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, obviously I talked already about all the sort of like working in little bits of different design stuff. So you've got the little bits of black that'll be worked in. But there's little bits of black and stuff like that I've worked into the design. And I think that'll add some nice color variance, and that'll be interesting as we're going here with the colors. The bandana is going to be green. Sometimes it's black. I prefer green. I prefer putting a bit more green in the design. Black, especially given that we've already got a lot more black working through the design already, so we don't necessarily need that here. The jacket is going to be brown. I prefer the brown jacket because that, again, adds a little bit more color variety as opposed to the jacket being green. I find that the green jacket is a little too much green in the design. Again, green and yellow are her colors. The background is going to be yellow, but I might maybe put like a big green stripe or something in it. We'll see about how I feel about that. Because ultimately, the color tones that I'm going to be going for here are warm tones. I don't want to put too much. I don't want to put green in the background. Green is sort of a cold color. Green is an odd one because it's technically a cold color, but there are warm greens. It's the same way there's technically warm blues, but that's just sort of thing to think about for now. I'll table that for another time. But yeah, so I think I'm gonna maybe put a little bit of green or something in the background, but it's mostly gonna be yellow, and our color palette is mostly going to be warm tones, yellows. So yeah, I think that's everything I needed to cover. I'm happy with our details so far. There weren't any sort of major adjustments I made or anything like that. I tried to keep the sort of a lot of this fairly close to the base sketch because I was very happy with the base sketch. I sort of rounded out a few edges. I sort of is there anything important that I changed? No, I sort of broadened out the legs a little bit, and I did something similar with the arms. I brought them out a tiny bit. I made her arms a little thicker, made her legs a little thicker, stuff like that. And I reshaped the sort of heel down here a little bit. But there's no real major adjustments beyond that. So, yeah. Yeah, I think I'm good to continue. I think we will do these colors, and then I'll be back to do the painted shading. Which isn't going to be a hugely long section this time. The shading shouldn't be too crazy. So, yeah, anyways, I'll do these colors and I'll be back. Alright, that's our colours. I chose to go for a pretty light brown for the jacket and a very reddy brown for her hair, so they're a lot more distinctly different. A lot of the time I would usually go for kind of similar browns for her hair and her jacket. I'd usually go for a darker one for the jacket, and the hair would only be a slightly reddier colour. Usually I would tend to go for, again as I think, a more sort of similar color between them, but I've gone for something lighter for the jacket and obviously redder for the hair. The green I had to do a lot of tinkering with, more so than the yellow. The yellow I just went for a brighter one than the background so that it's a little bit different, because there's these moments where, these areas where you can see the two yellows interacting, and I wanted it to be clearly different. Not so different that it doesn't have that slight blending effect, but different enough where it's distinct. Yeah, the green I had some problems with because I was sort of seeing, oh well, I kind of want it to be more of a more towards the yellow, but then I was like, it doesn't look very good. Then I was like, oh, more towards the blue, and I didn't like that either. I landed on something which is sort of a middle ground, but it's still a very deep color. And then the black is, I think that's fine. I was not so sure about the silver buckle on the silver trim on the X symbol on the belt, but I went for it as this design tends to have a silver buckle. or just a green belt, like with the green jacket. But yeah, ultimately I prefer the brown jacket and everything like that. So I decided to just make this silver buckle, because that's usually what is on this design. It's a black buckle on the green belt. That's the more cartoon version, is the green jacket and all that stuff. Yeah, is there anything else I really need to cover on the colors? Not massively. I didn't make any like crazy decisions that were different than what I'd already talked about. I decided to throw in that little bit of green in the background. I specifically chose a warmer green. I chose a sort of a yellower green so that it blends a little bit more on the background, and so that when the gradient maps are going on and they're going to be very warm colors, that it's not going to look too weird. It's not going to muddy that green too much, because, as I say, a warmer green anyways, so it's not going to get too sort of hideous looking. It won't be too ugly. But yeah, all I did was I just sort of made these long columns and then did a gradient through them. Just used my simple old gradient tool to make that look. But yeah, that's what I went with there. Nothing too crazy, nothing too extravagant. I'll be sort of doing that with the shading, painted shading. It's not going to be too crazy or extravagant, it's just going to be functional. So the dark side is going to be down here. I'm going to be using these stripes even as a sort of reference for the shading direction, because I'm going to be having the lighter part be around here, and the darker part be down here. And so yeah, these shadings, or these green stripes, the green gradients, are going to be a sort of measure for the direction of the dark parts. So that's sort of what I'm going to go for. We'll see how well that works. It's not going to be, the shading isn't going to be green. I'm probably going to use like maybe an orangey or reddy color for the darker parts. Again, warm colors is what we want to go for, so that's sort of what I'm going to stick to. We'll try and find something that doesn't interfere with our green too much. That'll be a tricky one, but I'll try and find something. That, and then I'll probably use a yellow. But yeah, I think that's all the preamble for our painted shading. I think I'll just do this, and then I'll be back to do the detailed shading and the light line colors. Yeah. Alright, that is our painted shading done. I decided to add a nice little bit of watercolory detailing to it, to just add those little bits of dustings of white to a lot of the different parts. That just adds this nice sort of watercolory look to everything. I mean, the brushes are watercolor anyways, so it's going to look like that, regardless of whether I add in the sort of the whitening elements, but it just adds a more traditional watercolor look to it, of the sort of little bits of white just to intersperse, just to brighten things up a little bit. So I added that in all the clothing, all the sort of, yeah, again, non-natural parts, like none in the hair and none in the face. Well, actually a little bit in the lips. So I did, yeah, I did add a little bit of that to sort of everything, the whitening effect, and I think it looks all right. I think it looks good. Happy with it. Yes, now we've got to do the detailed shading, our light line, and our first gradient map. I've obviously already got my color palette prepped. I'm going to be going with dark red for my darkest and a light yellow for my lightest. So we'll see how this looks. We might end up sort of fighting with our greens, but I can adjust things and try and work it so that the green is still nice and vivid, because I do want the green to be very visible. I had picked a very vivid green and I want to keep it vivid, so That's something which is going to maybe a bit more effort. But I will do my best to maintain the integrity of the green. So we will see. See what I can manage, but it is going to require some effort. Yeah, I'll stick with the yellow and the red for now. We'll see. I might have to adjust that later. Yeah. I don't think there's anything I really need to cover before we do this. I think I'll carry on. So I will do this detailed shading on my last bits, and then I'll be back to wrap up. So yeah. Okay, that is our detailed shading, light line, and first gradient map done. It started to get very warm in here all of a sudden, so you know the dressing gown had to go. I think this is the first time I've had to remove it mid-episode, but I suppose that's a weird thing of note, I guess. But yeah, so as you can see, I went for something very warm in terms of my color palette. It does sort of. It doesn't really mute our green, but it certainly it highlights it a little bit because everything else is so yellow toned. I suppose the yellow or the green comes out a little bit more. Our background becomes a lot less orangey yellow. It doesn't change that much really, but it just becomes a much less orangey yellow, and the green gets washed out a little bit. Again, not massively, but a little bit. It's worth noting that that happens in the first place. But I think we're good. I don't think I need to change this all that much. Currently I'm at a soft light layer, and I changed it to be a 60%. Soft light is normally what I go for, soft light or overlay. Overlay I looked at, it's a little more intense than really what I want here. I can even show you, it's just a little bit more intense than really what I want. I prefer the soft light. Now let's start making our duplicates. So we're going to want a luminosity low, or we're going to want that above. Low is darker. The above is much more green though. Lower the opacity of it down to 20%. See how much of a difference that really makes. I do kind of want it to be light, so I'll leave the luminosity above and I'll just lower it down to 15%. Now, let's make another duplicate. Have a look at the color burn. This is going to mute things a little bit, so let's just turn that up so I can see what I'm doing here. So below everything, we definitely don't want that's too muted. Our middle is not great. Oh, cool. No, one above everything, I'll leave it down to 5%. Subtle, but it just sort of deepens our shadows a little bit. Our other two gradient maps here are sort of not super high contrast, especially the luminosity. Usually the luminosity is a bit more high contrast than this. I left that kind of low. Let me put a duplicate and have a look, because I want this to sort of be a bit lighter. So let's see if I put a lighten layer on. Just the opacity on that. Well, it really doesn't do anything. Yeah, the lighten layer is not great. Let me remove that. Okay, and I think we're sort of going to be relying on our texture to lighten things up a little bit. We can see we might add another gradient map just in case. I don't think I'll need to, but we might add another one just in case. Again, I don't think I'll need to. I should be fine. Because recently I've been tinkering with adding fourth gradient maps. They're not usually all that necessary, but in terms of a specific visual effect, Now, if we're looking for a specific visual effect, it can be useful. Sometimes, like the last time with the Blanco one, I was looking for a very specific visual effect, which is very sort of deep shadows on our texture to be subtle this time, because it will be very visible on the background, or at the very least on our little gradients on the background. Let's see, how much does this affect the character? It sort of lightens up our lighter bits, softens some of the grittiness of them. That's about fine, that's kind of what I want. Put that nice little bit of texture. Subtle enough this time. Usually it can be a bit more aggressive. It just sort of depends on the colors that it is affecting, for the most part, really. But yeah, as I was saying, with the gradient maps, it really, like a fourth gradient map is only really necessary if there's a specific visual effect that I'm going for. Like obviously last time with Blanco, I was looking for very specifically high contrast, bright light edges and dark edges. So I used a multiply layer to sort of increase the sort of depth of what we already had in the colors. Whereas here, what I was trying to do is a lighten layer just to bring things up a bit. But our gradient map it doesn't have any sort of paler colors. All the colors are too vivid for the lighten layer to really work, because the lighten layer will sort of tilt things to be more towards the lightest color of the gradient map. And in this instance, the lightest color of the gradient map is still bright yellow. So there's no like whiter color in there, so it doesn't really do that. Doesn't really lighten it up in the way that I was trying to get it to. Far more yellow. Yeah, I think we're good. I think I'm happy with this. This one has been a time-consuming one, because this separate recording is already nearly 2 hours long, so this has been a nearly 5-hour one altogether. I think maybe even over 5 hours actually, now that I think about it. It was about 5 hours, which is one of the longer ones we've done recently. Well, a lot of these have been long, but the last one was short. But yeah, they vary wildly in terms of length. But yeah, as I had mentioned earlier, the reason why, a big part of the reason why these are bi-weekly is so that I can do stuff like this. That means the commitment is a lot, well, it is technically higher in terms of time of where it takes. An art video that would ordinarily be maybe 1 day is now 2. Or no, never had one go to 3 days. I don't intend for that to start, because that is, if it starts getting to be that many delays, then at that point I'll start to sort of losing the thread of what I was even supposed to be talking about. Like this one was posing, but granted I usually talk about all the posing stuff right at the start, so I didn't about that. And plus, I mean, it's easier to tell just by looking at it that this is more about posing. There was some color stuff I wanted to do as well, and we talked a lot about that, so we ended up going through all the stuff that I wanted to go over, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Overall, because I mean, we're done. So yeah, I think those little stripes of green in the background surprisingly do still come out. I'm surprised they didn't get more washed out. Here's an interesting thought. What does this look like? The MYK. Oh boy. Most of it isn't that much duller. It's just the green. Just the green becomes so much more blue. The MYK is what most printers use, so if this was to be printed, that is what it would look like. That is the sort of duller version of those. It's just interesting sometimes to have a look at that, even though I'd never actually print this. It's just sometimes interesting to see what it would look like in print. See how different it would be. Because RGB printers aren't common as far as I'm aware. Or at least not in terms of like a company. But yeah, anyways, I think that's about everything I wanted to say. I'm happy with this. This was a fun one. It had its challenging moments. Again, as I say, the details alone was nearly 3 hours. It's challenging in that respect. But yeah, I think Rogue is always a fun character to draw. Hence why I draw her so much. So this is the thing. There are certain characters like that who are just fun enough to draw. So I mean, and this is the thing. Part of the reason why I end up drawing Rogue so much is I like drawing hair, and there's a lot of hair to draw. And there's all these little things of where there's all the little elements of design, all the sort of bits and all that stuff. Like the belt is jacket sort of has that bit of where it sort of flaps around and down and all this stuff. Or it does just it. Well, can be challenging though, especially with the particular adjustments that I did. I think it does take a little longer. But yeah, I don't think there's any more to be said. I don't remember what I have to do next time. Oh, next time. Yeah, we'll see about that next time. That one will be a bit different. I forget what the actual topic is of that one, so I'll need to remind myself. But I think it might be posing again. Anyways, I will wrap up this video, and I will leave you. And I suppose the next one will be in 2 weeks. But, so if you like the video, do whatever it is that you do, whether that be liking it. Of course, prefer if you liked it, but I can't make you do that, so all I can do is politely suggest it, which I have done. The same deal if you want to subscribe, or I prefer if you did that, but you know, you don't have to. There's no obligation to do so. Did presumably seen a YouTube video before, so I don't need to tell you where the subscribe button is. It's below the video. I'm just polite like that. If you want to leave, if you would like to leave it or suggest something for me to draw in the future, you can comment in the comment section down below. I would like it if you did that. Boost engagement, does all those good things for a channel like this. But you know, you don't have to. Especially if you're not going to be polite about it. If you're not going to be polite, don't do it. Well, I don't want to. And yeah, if you choose to watch the next video, I will see you next time. All that said, bye. So.